Book 12 of the Silent One, The Siege of Penti by James Mandolare. Intro, The Spirit of Titus Flavius. Titus Flavius, son of the living god Vespasian, emperor of all Rome, sat at his desk in his campaign tent, writing a letter, as always, to Rome, requesting more money and supplies, and, as ever, more legions. He had been fighting this campaign for millions of years, it seemed. How many times had he taken the Galilean towns and laid siege to Jerusalem? He could not tell. How many thousands of rebels had he crucified? How many times had he burned down Herod the Great's temple? Over and over again. And as soon as Jerusalem surrenders in fire, dust, and ash, it all begins again. And the enemy grows ever stronger, until now, after all this time, they no longer even pretend to be Jewish rebels. They are now an unworldly thing. The enemy he has fought every day for a million years is a savage beast, a half-human lizard demon from out of Pluto's deepest, darkest abyss of Hades. It was rumored that the twisted soul of the greatest traitor to Rome to ever live, Gaius Julius, called himself Caesar. He himself led the lizard demons. A messenger arrived on horseback, and the monthly summons was handed to Titus by an aide. "Has it been a month already?" Titus asked absently as he tore the seal, read the blood-red letters. "You are cordially invited to the full moon feast at the court of Tonth, the Underking." Titus laughed. Pluto can call himself Tonth the Trickster if he so chooses. For Titus, this meant one thing: 2 days, 1 day and a night, and another traveling back without battle. Every month he got this 2-day reprieve from the smoke and fire and stench of death and battle. For 1 night, he would be free of this hellish desert of rocks and dusts and cliffs where demons hide in the high crags, waiting to throw stones down on his good Roman soldiers. How he hated those lizard beasts! He had crucified so many of them, hundreds of thousands, and still they came screaming out of the red dust with fire and swords, running with Roman blood. Rich, red Roman blood. "Except one," the great general muttered. "Zuzi." His blood heated with the thought of that luscious slave in his bed, sleeping just beyond that hanging tapestry. He sighed the name again. Zuzi. She was a woman of that beastly race, a petite reptilian beauty with a small, thin, and sexy body. She had strange, elongated, hypnotic, red-burning snake eyes, and monstrous, hard breasts, and a long and willing tongue. She was his slave, and he kept her always in chains. But they both knew Titus Flavius was a slave to her frenzied and wild lizard arts of animal lust. Titus was helplessly hers to command, and she always commanded one thing for all her wild, sensuous gifts: send more legions out into the cliffs to be sacrificed for the lizard demons and their red dragon overlords. And for all the dark delights she offered so freely, he gladly accepted the invisible chains of lust and sent his men off to die in a hopeless and endless battle. She would come with him to the feast, dressed only in chains, to be presented before the Underking as his right for the spoils. But the great king of the underworld, and emperor of this endless wasteland, was always merciful and returned her to Titus after he had used her to his heart's content for the night. Titus's Greek slave orderly arrived with his dress armor and proceeded to dress him in the ornate breastplate, red cape, and plumed gold helmet. He was given the grass crown of his leadership over the legions and took his sword and allowed the slave to put the belt on. The desert wind blew strong, and the tent flapped and rippled with the constant hot wind, making the tapestries of his many battles dance on the walls. Titus had been trapped in this world so long he hardly remembered when he had lived a life as Emperor of Rome after his father, growing to a ripe old age. He had ruled Rome as a god and lived a life of wealth, power, and indulgence, a high and noble family, divinely inspired to lead the greatest empire the world had ever known up to that point in history. It was Titus who conquered the Jewish rebels, destroyed their sacred city and their one God's temple, and created a new imperial cult to pacify the Jews and make it possible for the Hellenistic Jews to grow into a more Roman-friendly version of their ancient cultural beliefs. Titus had gathered the greatest Jewish philosophers of his time, Philo of Alexandria, and the Jewish prophet Josephus Flavius, and Titus's mistress, Bernice, the daughter of Herod. Based on the mystery schools of Greece and Egypt, they created a Jewish hero who was a pacifist and a man who preached love and tolerance. Putting this hero in the Julian age so he could make prophetic announcements of Titus's victory 40 years later was just another bit of genius by the greatest Jew in the world, dear old Josephus Flavius, adopted son of Rome. Josephus understood the Jewish scripture, and he knew how to write the story in a way to inspire his people to accept Roman rule as a commandment of their God. Titus was honored in Hades for this farce. For the Jews across the empire, it was a New Testament to the love, mercy, and charity of their one God, the Father. But Titus had secretly made it a farce known only to Romans, who could read it as a dark comedy about the military campaign that starved the holy city, destroyed their temple, and scattered the Jews to the four corners of the earth. But all that was so long ago now that Titus only thought of it when the full moon brought the summons. Pluto, or Tanth as he liked to be called, always toasted Titus and treated him with great honor. Pluto honored and respected Titus and his legions to keep the lizard armies from crossing the frozen river and invading Hades. So the endless battle went on and on for so many millions of years. Titus would not fight demon lizard beasts and huge red dragons in the rocky cliffs under the three purple peaks of the mountains of shadow today. Once his horse was saddled and prepared, he would ride the long, steep, rocky road up into the uplands, a series of cliffs rising ever higher onto the shoulders of the three sharp purple peaks of shadow. Up the hot, dusty road he would travel for hours until he came to the stone circle of monolithic standing stones that surrounded the tall black door that went deep into the mountain and down into the root of the mountains, to the great court of the Underking. He arrived at the rectangular door as the red light faded into a perpetual, dusky twilight. He dismounted and left his horse with his honor guard that would wait for him to reappear the next morning. Down into the black abyss inside the mountain Titus went, ever downward, seeing nothing in the long, dark blackness, until a red, dull light appeared far ahead, and he emerged into a room lit with a flickering firelight burning in a large stone fireplace. Candles were lit, and the room exploded into yellow light. The same courtiers were there that Titus had seen so many times, too many times, as he came every full moon to these gatherings. He greeted each one as they bowed to him. Adolf, Genghis, Napoleon, Tito, Benito, Stalin, MacArthur, Patton, Westmoreland, Nixon, Kissinger, Reagan, and Bush, and so many others. They were all here alive again, coming from their various endless battlefields to celebrate with the king of Hades, Tonth the Trickster. If Pluto wanted to be called Tonth the Trickster, who was Titus to argue? Since the title and name were not important, and the times and people who once trembled about Pluto's underworld were long gone to their reward or punishment. According to the Underking, the world was changed, and many civilizations had come and gone since Tonth was called Pluto. Titus went through the motions, as he was taught to do since childhood, respecting the powerful and honoring them with courtesy and respect, as fellow conquerors who came after Rome. None were more honored than Titus, and he was welcomed warmly by the god of the underworld. But for Titus, this was all a terrible bore. Too many times he had been summoned and ate and drank and chatted with these shadow warriors of the past. Too many times he had heard their strangely accented voices bragging about their many conquests. Too many times he had seen their cold and calculating faces of these cruel mass murderers, and he felt horrible knowing that he too was one of their company of infamy. Known for all time as a sacker of holy cities and the murderous scourge of history, destroyer even of the great temple of the one God. Here they all were in their many uniforms, speaking dead languages from cultures that had long ago turned to dust throughout all time and all history. He knew every one of them well from these monthly gatherings. A million times in this hellish eternity he had sat with them and laughed and ate and drank with them. Then, to Titus's great shock and delight, he saw a new face he had never seen before, and it excited him that something new was happening in the maddening monotony of this dark red realm. Titus was shocked by this new face, a handsome man with dark blonde hair and a long thin face and a trimmed goatee. His eyes were green and bright, unlike the rest of the company, whose eyes were dull with endless repetition. What new atrocity had been loosed upon the world to bring a new tyrant into our midst? Titus wondered, as the man took his place and addressed the gathering. Titus studied that handsome face and saw the conceit common to all this nefarious collection of murderers. That slight narcissistic smile on an impeccably groomed face, the cold, calculating, frozen expression, giving little away of the thought behind the calculating, shifting eyes. The new visitor's clothes were strange and different from everyone else's. He wore no uniform, but was dressed in a long tunic and cape, with a golden belt, and a nicely embroidered red overcoat. A very wealthy man, looking like he was dressed for some kind of masquerade ball. "I am Lord Redlick," the thin man said, addressing Titus, introducing himself with a Roman handshake. "I am here to offer you a chance to rejoin the living world again, and ending this eternal war that you will never win. Divine Caesar, Titus Flavius, scourge of the Jews, destroyer of the Galilean towns, sacker of Jerusalem, and destroyer of the temple, I offer you the vanguard. You shall be first among the armies of the past to leave this red realm behind and enter into the green world again to fight one more war, and then be set free from this torture and allowed to join your beloved friends in the Elysian fields at the court of Mars Invictus. Would you like that?" Redlick's cultured voice rose to address the whole company. "Who will follow Titus Flavius's legions into the world again, to live and to rule? Which of you wish to join the unfolding history of your world and conquer again an empire to rule as you see fit with me? Who among you would not want to leave here, to rejoin your soul friends in the fields of Mars, and leave this battlefield behind for the higher realms of the blue dreams of pleasure and reward? Impossible, shouted Titus. We cannot cross the border to live again without passing through the room door and forgetting all we have been, to become again the tiny babe lost in the wide world, without dignity or power. No, it is a lie. I will not lose all I have gained to return to a world that knows nothing of my greatness and power. Redlick laughed. He threw back his cape and produced a glowing red scepter with two heads carved in the head of the staff, facing opposite ways. This is the scepter of Janus. It was handed down in my family, and I can use it to open up the portal. I can bring you alive into the living world to carry on your work, to rule an enlightened world under your dictatorship. You will rule with me over the world again, and I will make it possible for you to fight the last battle and take the world for your own. I have powerful friends that will bring everlasting fire to burn away all resistance. Another spirit appeared beside Redlick out of a red fire that emanated from his staff. A blast of hot fire erupted for an instant and blinded the company, who all shrank back from the blast. When they could look again, they saw a horror had joined them, a fiercely burning skull dressed in black robes, with an oval of burning fire all around it, stood there looking at them with red burning eyes. This is the archdemon, ancient Demortiel, who will pave the way for your armies to march again into the world with unquenchable fire. With my scepter and this fire, I will restore you to life and to power. And when that war has been fought and won, you will be released and allowed to join Vespasian and Josephus and Bernice and Philo and all the gods and goddesses in the upper realms of peace and pleasure. What is this service you demand? Titus asked. Only 4 towns and a capital city to raise and lay siege and conquer. It is lightly defended. It is a new world for you to rule until you leave the world for the higher realms. Another empire has replaced your ancient Roman Empire. Many civilizations have come and gone since you walked the green hills beneath the sun. With the royal bearing of many a tyrant king, Redlick smiled warmly up at the tall Caesar, Titus Flavius. You will help me conquer this false empire, and once you have laid siege to Penti and brought her white walls down as you did of old in ancient Jerusalem, and when the temple of Corlin has been burned and broken so that not one stone rests upon another, and when the 3 children of Pentuliax have been buried in the rubble, you will ascend, dear son of the living god Vespasian, divine Caesar, to be Jupiter Optimus Magnus, the greatest emperor of all time, emperor of all heaven. The company all raised their golden goblets of wine and touched them all together in an agreement to these terms. They shouted with lusty power all together. Only a fool would say no to that, shouted Titus above the rest. All the assembled companies shouted back and rattled their swords and sabers and shot off their pearl-handled pistols and automatic weapons. They drained their goblets and threw them against the fireplace. Outside the room, cannons roared as the legions and many armies took up the roar, and the whole wasteland echoed with the noise of it, far across the dry, cracked, endless plain of the wasteland, and up into the mountains to echo and amplify the throaty shouts and explosions high up into the sheer cliffs of the mountains of shadow overlooking the red Paderborn wasteland.